Trail cameras and cell cameras in particular have, I think it's fair to say, completely changed whitetail hunting over the last, trail cameras have been decades now, but cell cameras just the recent handful of years. But as popular as they've become and how helpful they are, I think they have also been very underutilized or mistakenly used in ways that lead to actually detrimental outcomes. That's the bad news. The good news is the guy standing next to me worked for and owned a trail camera company for nearly a decade. So he has been around the block on this issue, seen all the different ways things have gone wrong, identified all the mistakes that people make. And so today, Jake, I want you to help us understand what are those worst mistakes made with cell cameras and how do we avoid them?
Everyone that whitetail hunts, I would say almost 70 to 80% of people use cell cameras. And so there's a lot of mistakes and a lot of potential benefits of a cell camera, but the benefits you're not able to find if you're making some key mistakes that I've made and I know a lot of people make across the country. And I think the first one is not using an external power source. These things drain a lot of battery. Imagine you stick your phone on a tree. Hey, every time something walks by, it's gonna send a picture. That's what these are essentially doing. So there's a constant battery drain. And you're hanging these cameras to not have to go back in and mess with them. You're probably hanging them in sensitive areas.
That's what makes cell cameras so great, right?
Yeah.
Is that you don't need to. You shouldn't have to go in there.
Yes, and so I think that is the biggest thing, not using an external power source. There's multiple options. Solar panels are great. A lot of them will actually soak up ambient sunlight and have a lithium battery pack inside the panel. So it's not completely dependent on the sun. If there's no sun, your camera's not gonna work. That's not the case. I think that is probably the biggest thing, especially if your camera's 3 states away or 3 hours away. And so you're wasting time, gas, and you're impacting your farm to go in and fiddle with something by not doing it right in the first place. There's other options like an external power source, a battery that you put a battery at the base and those can last a long time, or you can do both potentially. So I think external power sources are the most underutilized and biggest mistake if you're not using them. Beyond that, I mean, none of this is rocket science. It's more discipline of, I don't want to spend the money and pay extra for a solar panel. I just bought the camera. And what you'll save in batteries, you're going to be money ahead. And you take out the fiddle factor and you're going to be way far ahead.
Well, it kind of goes back to the whole like carpentry mantra, which is, measure twice, cut once. I think that applies a lot to cell cameras because, again, the thing that makes cell cameras so special is that you set them and then you should be able to forget them and not need to go in there and pressure your deer, educate your deer, mess things up, right? But if you don't measure twice in the beginning, all these different mistakes happen and then you end up having to go in anyways to fix stuff. Whether it be, like you mentioned, your battery's dying because you didn't have an external food source. Or another one that I've been guilty of is not properly setting it up with like prepping the location. So hypothetically, let's say we hung a camera here and I, pointed my camera towards this tree because I'm hoping they're gonna make a scrape underneath it. Well, if I don't adequately clear weeds and vegetation out of the way, then maybe I'm getting constantly, poor photos or photos of moving grass all the time or whatever. Or maybe I didn't take the time to properly aim it, right? Most of these cameras have features now, like this one right here has a live aim feature, which if you take the extra 5 seconds to flip it on and actually check what the viewfinder is showing on your phone, you can see exactly what's pointed at. I've been guilty sometimes of being in a rush and I'm just like, just flip it on. All right, I gotta go on to the next one. And then I just kind of eyeball what it's pointing at. And then I drive home or I'm 4 hours away and I start getting pictures and I realize like, oh crud, it's showing this side of a tree and it's not actually pointing at what I want.
And you get a reminder every time a picture's sent that you screwed up.
Or even just 100% testing your connection and sending a test picture.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Like sometimes I've gotten too busy and not done that and just assumed it's gonna work. Every once in a while, these cell cameras don't work exactly like you want them to. So you wanna confirm that pictures are actually coming through, that your connection actually is good. So that's my biggest thing with cell cameras. The biggest mistake I've made in the past has been rushing the initial setup. If you take the time to make sure all of those things are lined up, your power, your aim, your area, you do that once, then you can reap the benefits for months.
I agree with all of that. And I like to take 5 minutes. Maybe it's not actually 5 minutes of going through the whole checklist to make sure it's exactly what I am anticipating from a picture standpoint, the framing, and making sure it sends photos. And then if you set it up properly, you won't have to go back and mess with it. The solar panel set up properly, it's secured, and then you get pure data. That's a really big thing. So you're not setting any ground scent, going in to check cameras. And I think everyone at some point is in a rush, and then you get the reminder. Oh man. And it's annoying.
This episode is brought to you by Ram Trucks. Nothing stops Ram.
Okay, so we talked a lot about setup mistakes. Is there any other gear-related, feature-related sides of things with cell cameras that we need to be thinking about?
I think there's a lot of different things, actually. One of the biggest issues typically is rooted to an SD card. So maybe you're swapping SD cards in between cameras, you're not formatting it properly. This camera doesn't have an SD card, it has internal storage, so you're pretty much set. But that's something, if you're using another brand, that could be a definite issue. You're putting in a 250 gigabyte card and the camera's likely not gonna work with that. So making sure you're using the right SD card, it's formatted, and that's very simple.
So how do you make sure it's the right one? Are you saying just checking with your individual camera, make sure you know what the max size it can handle?
Every camera's a little bit different, but most of them have a feature where you can go in there and format the card. And so how it's gonna write the data on the card is correct versus you take one out of one brand that's formatted a certain way, you put it in a different brand. You can definitely have issues. There's times where it might work, but we're just talking about doing the extra proper steps of preparation. So I would say that's probably one of the bigger things. The other one would be firmware updates. Would be a lot of these manufacturers are making improvements, fixing bugs. And so I would say firmware updates is another thing. Make sure it's updated properly before you go take it out there. Instead of coming out here and like, oh, it's not connecting. I don't know what's going on. Oh, I have to download this on my computer. And this camera is pretty darn simple straight out of the box, but that would be another tech related issue. The other thing in terms of the power consumption is, I don't know why people use alkaline batteries in a cell camera. I know they're a lot cheaper, but cold weather is going to impact them. Their battery life is not nearly as long. And once again, it's getting back to, we want to set this and forget it. And if you're using alkaline batteries, it's not gonna last likely very long.
Something that just came to mind for me when it comes to mistakes with cell cameras is, overemphasizing the importance. So while we've talked about how important they are and how useful they are and the fact that you wanna set them, properly set them, and then forget them, and then they can do all this magic for you. On the flip side, I think a lot of people today have become so married to their cell cameras, so dependent on their cell cameras, that they start believing that only what shows up on that camera is what's out on their farm. And so there'll be people who say, well, I'm not gonna go hunt that farm until the buck I'm after shows up on camera, or I'm not gonna go hunt this spot until I see that he's there. And they base their entire strategy around what these cameras tell you. And these are powerful tools, but they are still only telling you the tiniest slice of what's happening out there. And I think a lot of folks, myself sometimes included, have missed out on many, many opportunities.
Many good hunts.
Not just good hunts, not just good times, but also opportunities to learn. The very best scouting method, much better than cell cameras, is actually being in the woods watching. When I'm sitting in a tree, I can see a much wider swath than the 20 yards by 60 feet that I can cover with a cell camera. It's important to sometimes be the camera, to be actually out there observing, actually hunting, predicting behavior based on weather and topography and what you know about deer behavior and what you know about past history on this farm, like all of that stuff, woodsmanship, that still matters more than cameras matter. So let's not let these things become too much of a crutch, because if we do that, we take what's a great tool and we actually end up hurting ourselves.
I think it's easy to have a cell camera short circuit your brain and really influence too many things. And I've been guilty of that. I think everyone has been guilty of that in some degree. And I couldn't agree more. It comes down to, this is telling you only what is right in front of you. And there's a lot of landscape on any farm that you're going to be missing things. I think the other side of it is there's more efficient trail camera locations. I can't remember how many times I was asked, maybe it was at a trade show, an email message, whatever the case may be, of someone describing an area with no signal. Hey, will cell camera work there? Unfortunately, probably not. There's some cameras that connect to multiple carriers, and so in those scenarios, it might work. But if you're in a spot where your phone says SOS, a cell camera, unfortunately, is probably not gonna be effective for you.
So flipping the on switch and praying is not a good strategy, huh?
I mean, you could try, but it's probably not a good strategy.
No. So one other thing that comes to mind for me, which kind of goes back to a lot of this discussion. A lot of this discussion comes down to doing things right in the beginning so you can enjoy things the rest of the way. And I think one final aspect of that with cell cameras and trail cameras of any type is just proper placement. You know, we talked about properly setting it up so you can see what you're looking at, clear the space, but then also think about how cameras might influence deer activity and deer behavior. There's a lot of debate about this. There's a lot of theories, how deer may or may not be impacted by flash or sounds from a camera or anything like that. But I generally like to, especially in heavily pressured places, err on the side of caution. And so I'm a proponent of, in many cases, hanging cameras up high, pointing them down, just to be out of that deer's face and be a little bit lower impact. That's especially important if you're hunting in a place that's shared with other folks, just so you're not having your camera possibly stolen or messed with. So that's something to think about.
Real quick on the flash units too, and that's a highly debated topic from a scientific background. Red flash is likely outside of the spectrum of a deer's vision, but I think people see it. It's not like a camera flash going off like, what are these cameras, but rather just a light glow. I've had red flash cameras in a deer bed, a buck bed right in front of it, and hang out all night. And obviously if that was a major flash going to the deer, I don't think he probably would have done that. But there's black flash and red flash. The black flash is going to be invisible to the human eye, which if you're in a high pressured area or shared permission or public ground or an area where your camera's going to get stolen, spending a little extra money for a black flash camera is probably a good call. If you're in an area where you're not really concerned or a really low pressure area, I feel completely comfortable using a red flash camera. As far as placement, I think pointing them to where you're not going to get a ton of sun flare is something that's really important. The other thing too is cameras are triggered by change in infrared radiation. And so it's not just a weed blowing in front of the camera that triggers it. It's the mixture of sun and heat, and then the movement is what's actually triggering the camera, which is a pretty common misconception. Once again, cell cameras are an exceptional tool if you use them correctly. People are still making the same mistakes year over year. If I could boil it all down to more than likely one major issue, it's your power sources. Use a lithium rechargeable battery pack, a solar panel, or lithium batteries, and you're going to thank yourself so much, and I just cannot stress that enough. Every time you get a notification on your phone, you're gonna say thank you to yourself.